At 2:43 in the morning, the fire alarm didn't go off. That's what the investigation would later confirm. The alarm had been disabled. Fireman Rodriguez arrived at the scene 30 seconds after the first 911 call, and what he saw made his stomach drop. The house on Maple Drive wasn't burning. It was exploding. Flames shot through the windows like they were being fired from inside, hungry and violent, consuming everything they touched. The roof collapsed inward with a thunderous crack that echoed through the quiet suburban street, and embers scattered into the darkness like dying stars. The neighbors, the ones who made it outside in time, stood frozen on their lawns in their pajamas, phones raised, filming instead of helping. They knew there was nothing to help anymore. The heat alone kept them 50 yards back. One woman, Mrs. Chen from next door, kept saying the same words over and over. "I heard her screaming. I heard her screaming." Another neighbor, James Wright, watched flames consume the second-floor bedroom and felt his legs go weak. He'd waved at that house every morning for 3 years. He'd seen the husband backing out of the driveway, always in a hurry. He'd seen the wife tending to the front flowers, always smiling. Now there was nothing but fire. By the time the fire trucks pulled up, the destruction was total. The living room had collapsed into the basement. The kitchen was unrecognizable, just charred walls and melted metal. Firefighters moved through the wreckage with grim faces and practiced efficiency, knowing what they would find. It took them 23 minutes to locate the first body, then the second. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. But here's what those firefighters didn't know yet. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a faulty electrical wire or a forgotten stove. This was calculated. This was rage turned into gasoline and a lighter held with intent. This was a man who decided that if he couldn't control her in life, he would destroy her, and everything she represented in death. The question isn't how the fire started. The question is what led a man to light that match? What pushed him to pour gasoline across his living room while his wife slept upstairs? What made him believe this was the only way out? The answer lies in a story that started long before the flames ever touched that house. It started with grief. It started with a funeral that cost $20,000. And it started with a husband who couldn't stand the thought of his wife's love for a dead boy overshadowing his own needs. This is the story of Monica and Derek Harris. This is the story of how love became a weapon, and this is the story of why some fires can't be put out, because they're burning in a place the water can't reach. What happens when the person you trust most becomes the person you fear most? Monica Harris had never been the type to ask for much. At 35, she'd learned that life takes before it gives, so she didn't waste energy on wanting things she couldn't hold. Her apartment had been small, 2 bedrooms in a neighborhood where the sirens came every night, but it was hers. The walls were clean. The kitchen was organized, and in the second bedroom, her only child, Jalen, did his homework on a desk she'd refinanced her car to afford. Jalen was 14, tall for his age, with hands that moved when he talked, and dreams that seemed too big for their small apartment. He wanted to be an engineer, not just any engineer. He wanted to design bridges. He spent hours sketching designs in notebooks, showing his mother sketches that looked professional enough to be blueprints. Monica kept every single one in a box under her bed. She'd pull them out when the bills got overwhelming, when her feet hurt from the night shift at the hospital, when she wondered if any of her sacrifices actually mattered. Those sketches told her they did. The drunk driver didn't see the light turn red. The police report said his blood alcohol was 0.18, more than twice the legal limit. He'd been driving for 16 hours straight, apparently, coming back from his brother's house in Delaware. When he hit Jalen's car, the impact was immediate and absolute. The boy was walking home from basketball practice, headphones in, thinking about the history test he had on Monday. He never heard the car coming. He never had time to be afraid. Monica got the call at 11:47 p.m. while she was on her break at the hospital, sitting in the break room, drinking cold coffee and reading a message from Jalen saying he'd be home by midnight. The police officer's voice was professional, but hollow. The kind of hollow that comes from delivering this news too many times. Her son had been pronounced dead on arrival at the scene. They were so sorry. Was there someone they could call for her? For 3 days, Monica didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't fall apart the way the grief counselor kept suggesting she should. Instead, she walked through Jalen's room like she was in a museum, touching his things with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. His basketball jersey, number 23, still smelled like him. She pulled it on over her clothes and sat on his bed, and that's where her mother found her, unmoving, staring at the wall for hours. On the 4th day, Monica made a decision. Her boy deserved a funeral that reflected his worth, not the cheap, rushed kind. The kind that said, "This child mattered. This child was loved. This child deserved to be remembered with beauty, not with budget constraints." She cashed out every penny of her retirement fund, $6,800. She took out a personal loan, another $9,000. She sold her car and bought a used Honda with the money. By the time the funeral was planned, she'd spent exactly $20,000. The ceremony happened on a Thursday afternoon. The church was packed with people from Jalen's school, Monica's hospital co-workers, extended family she barely spoke to anymore. The casket was lined with white silk. There were white lilies everywhere, in vases, in arrangements, covering the altar. The gospel choir sang Amazing Grace the way it was meant to be sung, with power and presence, and the kind of pain that only comes from people who've lost before. Jalen's casket was lowered into the ground under a clear blue sky, and Monica stood at the grave's edge, steady and composed, her hand gripping a photo of her boy, and she didn't let herself collapse until 3 weeks later. But during those 3 weeks, something shifted. A man named Derek Harris had started coming around. Derek came into Monica's life like an answer to a prayer she didn't know she'd been praying. He appeared at a grief support group she'd started attending, sitting in the back with a gentle expression and kind eyes. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who held the door open and remembered the names of people he'd just met. He said his sister had died 5 years ago, and he understood what she was going through. He said it with such sincerity that Monica believed him. Or maybe she just needed to believe someone, anyone, could understand the hollow thing living in her chest. They started talking after the meetings. He'd walk her to her car, and they'd sit on the curb for hours while traffic moved around them. He listened to her stories about Jalen, about the bridges he wanted to build, about his terrible jokes, about the way he'd hug her without warning just because. Derek's face would be soft and attentive, and he'd ask follow-up questions, and he'd say things like, "You're so strong to carry this, and Jalen was lucky to have a mother like you." 3 months later, they were dating. 6 months later, they were married in a small courthouse ceremony with Monica's mother as the witness. Monica had moved into his house, a nicer place in a suburb with better schools, though that no longer mattered. Derek said he'd been waiting his whole life to find someone real, someone who understood loss the way Monica did. He said she was the one who'd been missing from his life. What Monica didn't know was that Derek had done this before. Not the marriage part, but the hunting part. His first ex-girlfriend had left him when she realized he monitored every dollar she spent. His second had taken out a restraining order after he showed up at her workplace 17 times in 1 week. His third had eventually married someone else just to escape the constant checking in, the questions about where she'd been, the anger over lunch she bought with her own money. Derek had learned to move slowly. He learned to be patient. He learned that grief makes people vulnerable in ways they don't understand until it's too late. Monica was grieving, deep, soul-level grieving, and she was lonely. She wanted to believe that the universe had sent her someone to share the weight. She wanted to believe that after losing her son, she was finally getting something back. The signs were small at first. A text asking what time she'd be home from work. Questions about her co-workers. Specifically, was anyone male? An offhand comment about the hospital scrubs she wore, suggesting they were inappropriate. But Monica was so grateful for his attention, so relieved to have someone who seemed to care, that she didn't recognize these signs for what they were. The opening move in a very old, very practiced game. Derek had financial problems no one knew about. 2 failed business ventures. A house he'd bought that lost 50 grand in value. Mounting debt under a pile of credit cards. When Monica mentioned one evening that she'd spent $20,000 on the funeral, Derek's eyes changed. For just a moment, his expression shifted. Then he recovered, asking gentle questions. Did she have more money saved? What was her life insurance situation? How much was she worth anyway if anything happened to her? Monica answered his questions. She trusted him. She showed him her bank statements because he asked, and she believed it was only because he cared about her financial future. She didn't understand that he was calculating, that he was measuring her worth, that he was already thinking about the ways she could be more valuable to him dead than alive. What happens when you marry someone and realize you've married a stranger? The funeral bill arrived 3 weeks after the ceremony. Monica had put the remainder on a credit card, the amount she couldn't scrape together in cash. Derek held the invoice in his hand, reading it like a verdict had just been handed down. $20,000. The number sat between them like a living thing. You spent what? He was standing in the kitchen, still in his work clothes, holding the paper like it was contaminated. Monica was cooking dinner, her famous jerk chicken, the recipe her mother taught her. She didn't turn around. I told you about the funeral, Derek. You were there. I was there. I didn't think you'd drain everything we have to throw a party for a dead kid. The words hit like a physical thing. Monica's hand stilled on the wooden spoon. Slowly she turned around. Derek was standing there, his jaw tight, his eyes narrow. She'd never heard him use that tone before. Not with her. With his boss on the phone, yes. With a customer service representative sometimes. But never with her. He was my son, Monica said quietly. My only son. Exactly. He was. Past tense. He's gone, Monica. He's not coming back. That 20 grand didn't change anything. It didn't bring him back. All it did was set us back financially when I'm already carrying most of the bills in this house. You're carrying the bills? Derek, I work full-time. I contribute. You contribute. Let me tell you what I see. I see a woman who would rather spend her last dime honoring a death than building a future with the man she married. His voice dropped lower, colder. I see disrespect. I see you choosing him over us. That's not fair. Monica's voice trembled. That's not what happened. You'd rather bury the dead than build with the living, he said. That's what I see. He left the kitchen. Monica heard his car keys hitting the counter in the living room, heard the front door slam. She stood there for 20 minutes, the chicken burning slightly in the pan. And she tried to understand how the man who'd held her while she cried about Jaylin could speak about her son that way. She tried to understand where this anger had come from, why her grief, which he'd seemed to understand so completely, had become a betrayal. That night, when Derek came home, he was calmer. He apologized, sort of. He said he'd had a bad day at work. He said he didn't mean to direct it at her. He held her hand while they sat on the couch and said, I just worry about our future, babe. I just want to know we're on the same page. She accepted the apology. She believed him. She didn't understand that this was part of the pattern, the anger, the apology, the softness that made you think you'd misunderstood the anger in the first place. The tension, though, didn't disappear. It settled into the house like a permanent guest. Derek's comments became more frequent. He'd mention the funeral when they discussed money. He'd bring it up when she wanted to go out with friends. When her co-worker Tasha invited her to happy hour, Derek asked why she was wasting money on drinks when they were struggling financially, when she suggested maybe they should see a counselor. He laughed and said counseling was for people with real problems. One evening, 3 months after the funeral, Monica came home to find Derek at her laptop. Her laptop, which she'd left open on the kitchen table. What are you doing? She asked, keeping her voice level. Checking your email, he said, not looking up. Just making sure you're not doing anything I need to know about. Derek, those are my personal emails. Your personal emails are our personal emails. You're my wife. I shouldn't have to wonder what you're up to. She felt something close inside her, a door shutting, a light going out. But she didn't say anything. Instead, she closed the laptop gently and went upstairs to their bedroom, where she sat on the edge of the bed and tried to remember what it felt like to be safe in her own house. By month 5 of their marriage, Monica had stopped telling Derek when she was working late. She simply texted him from the hospital, and if he asked too many questions, she lied. She said she'd gone home and gone to bed. She said she was resting. She said whatever would cause him the least amount of anger. Her friend Tasha noticed at work. She saw how Monica's eyes had gone distant, how she flinched sometimes when her phone buzzed, how her laughter had become careful and measured. One evening, Tasha showed up at Monica's house unannounced. She'd called first, and when Derek answered, he'd said Monica was sleeping. But Tasha knew Monica's schedule. Monica would be getting ready for her night shift. So Tasha came anyway, and when Monica opened the door in her hospital scrubs, Tasha saw the bruise that ran along her collarbone. Girl, Tasha said, stepping inside. What is that? Monica's hand went to her neck, covering the mark. Nothing. I'm clumsy. You're clumsy. Tasha's voice was flat. I've known you for 8 years. You're not clumsy. What's happening? From upstairs, they heard movement. Derek stirring, probably wondering who was at the door. Monica's entire body went rigid. She practically pushed Tasha toward the exit. You need to get out, Monica whispered. Before he what? Sees your friend. Please, Tasha, just go. That's when Tasha understood. This wasn't clumsiness. This was fear. This was Monica. moving through her own house like she was trying to be invisible. Tasha had seen this before in other women, the way they held themselves smaller, the way their eyes checked for exits, the way they flinched at sounds. "Listen to me," Tasha said, grabbing Monica's shoulders. "You need to leave this man. You need to get out before..." "Before what?" Monica's smile was hollow. "Before he does something. He just doesn't understand what Jalen meant to me. Once he works through his stuff, once he realizes that honoring my son wasn't about disrespecting him, it'll get better." Tasha looked at her friend, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd convinced herself that this was normal, that this was love, that if she just explained herself better, if she just tried harder, if she just loved more, everything would be fine. Tasha had seen this look before, and it terrified her, because she knew where it led. "Monica," Tasha said softly. "Please." But Monica was already closing the door, and Tasha could see it in her friend's eyes, that hollow, distant look, the look of someone who'd already given up, even if they didn't know it yet. What choices lead us to the point where we can no longer choose? By month 7 of the marriage, Derek had convinced Monica that the way he treated her was normal, that checking her phone was just being protective, that asking her where she was every hour was just being interested, that his sudden rages over small things, a text from a male co-worker, a dinner that was too salty, a night shift that lasted longer than expected, were justified because she'd somehow provoked them. He'd started checking her bank account without asking. He'd started requiring her to justify every purchase over $20. He'd started commenting on what she wore to the hospital, suggesting that the scrubs made her look available to other men. He'd started staying up when she came home from night shifts, waiting for her, questioning her about every detail, who she'd worked with, what they'd talked about. Why had she been in the break room for 15 minutes? Monica found herself rehearsing her answers before she got home. She started writing down her shift details so she could keep her stories straight. She deleted text messages from friends. She stopped answering when Tasha called, because answering meant Derek would ask who it was, and then there would be an argument about why she was allowing other people to take her attention away from her marriage. The physical marks appeared slowly. First, a hand around her wrist that gripped too hard when she tried to explain something to him. Then a shove toward the kitchen counter when she disagreed with him about money. Then a slap across her face when she came home 10 minutes late from work and couldn't explain the delay satisfactorily. She told herself these things were accidents, that he was stressed, that she'd provoked him by being difficult. One evening, Monica sat in the hospital break room during her shift, and she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt safe. She couldn't remember the last time she'd taken a full breath. She couldn't remember the last time she'd looked in the mirror without wondering if she deserved what was happening to her. Her co-worker, Nurse Patricia, noticed how quiet Monica had become. She noticed the way Monica's hands shook sometimes, the way she'd zone out in the middle of conversations, the way she'd jump if someone came up behind her unexpectedly. One night, Patricia sat down next to her and said, "Monica, I've worked emergency medicine for 23 years. I know what abuse looks like, and I'm looking at it right now." Monica's first instinct was to defend Derek, to explain that he was going through something, to say that it wasn't that bad, that other women had it worse, that she should be grateful because at least he cared. But Patricia just waited, and in that silence, something shifted. Monica felt the truth of it, that this wasn't love, that this was the opposite of love, that somewhere along the way she'd stopped being a person in her own home and started being a problem that needed managing. That night, Monica made a decision. She called Tasha, and through tears, she said she needed to leave. Tasha helped her pack a small bag, just her nursing scrubs, her ID, and a photograph of Jalen. She'd stay with Tasha for a few nights while she figured out next steps. She'd talk to a lawyer. She'd file for divorce. She'd get her life back. Monica even whispered a prayer before getting into bed that night at Tasha's place. She thanked God for giving her the strength to choose herself. She thanked God for Tasha, for Patricia, for the moment of clarity that had broken through the fog. She prayed for protection. She prayed for peace. And she prayed that tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of her life. She didn't know that Derek had already received a notification on his phone, a credit card alert showing that Monica had purchased a gas station drink at 7:34 p.m., miles away from home. A location he didn't recognize, a movement he hadn't authorized. He was already checking his tracking app, the one Monica didn't know she'd given him permission to install when she let him update her phone. He could see her location now, blinking on the map like a red dot marking an escape route he wouldn't allow. By the time Derek got home from work and discovered the packed bag on the bed, he was already running the numbers in his head, the life insurance policy he'd taken out 3 months ago. The one where Monica was the beneficiary, $500,000 in case anything happened to him. Except he'd forged the documents. Except he'd changed the beneficiary to himself. Except he'd been planning this moment since the day he realized how much money she was worth. And now his wife was trying to leave him. His wife was choosing safety over him. His wife was about to ruin everything. That's when the rage came. The kind of rage that doesn't think. The kind of rage that just acts. The kind of rage that reaches for gasoline. Will Monica make it through the night alive? The car pulled into the driveway at 9:47 p.m. Monica heard the engine cut off, heard the driver's side door open and slam shut with more force than necessary. Her stomach dropped. She was at Tasha's house, but something in her body still reacted to the sound of Derek's car. That's when she realized he knew where she was. He'd texted 3 times that evening. Tasha hadn't shown her the messages until now, spreading them across the phone screen like evidence at a trial. "Where are you?" the first text read. "I know you're with Tasha," the second one said. "Get home! Now!" the third commanded. Monica's hands went cold. She checked her phone. 12 missed calls. The tracking app was still active on her device. She'd forgotten to disable it, and Derek had been following her movements all day, watching that red dot move from the hospital to Tasha's apartment, knowing exactly where his wife was at every moment. Tasha called a locksmith while Monica stood by the window, watching the street below for any sign of him. They'd get the locks changed in the morning. They'd file a restraining order first thing. They'd get ahead of this. But Derek was already moving. He sat in his truck in the parking lot of Tasha's apartment complex for 43 minutes. The security camera would later show him checking his phone repeatedly, his face illuminated by the screen. He had gasoline in the truck bed. He had a lighter in his pocket. He had a $500,000 life insurance policy that said Monica's death would make him rich. He'd spent weeks planning this, researching how fire spreads through residential buildings, how long it takes for someone to wake up from the smoke, where to pour the accelerant for maximum damage. At 10:31 p.m., Derek drove away from the apartment complex. He didn't go home. Instead, he went to the hardware store, the one that was open 24 hours, and he bought 5 red plastic containers. He filled them at the gas station using his credit card. Each container held 5 gallons, 25 gallons of gasoline total, enough to burn down a house and everything in it. Meanwhile, at Tasha's apartment, Monica was packing her belongings into trash bags. She'd decided she wouldn't go home tomorrow. She'd go to a lawyer's office. She'd file for an emergency protective order. She'd file for divorce. She'd take whatever was hers and leave everything else. Her hands shook as she folded her scrubs, as she gathered her identification, as she held Jalen's photograph against her chest like it could protect her from what was coming. Tasha sat on the bed and watched her friend move through the apartment with the kind of focus that comes from survival instinct. She'd called the police department and reported the harassment, the tracking, the excessive calls, the aggressive texts. A dispatcher had documented everything. An officer would stop by in the morning to take a formal report. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, they were safe. Tasha had a security system. She had neighbors close by. She had her phone on the nightstand, ready to call 911 if anything happened. At 11:15 p.m., Monica's phone rang. It was Derek. She watched it ring, his name flashing on her screen, and she didn't answer. It rang again immediately. And again. On the fourth call, she picked up. "Where are you?" His voice was steady. But underneath was something else, something that sounded like the edge of a cliff. "I'm safe," Monica said. "That's all you need to know. You're with Tasha. You're at her apartment. You're in her spare room, probably thinking about how you're going to take me to the cleaners in court." He paused. "You know I can see you, right? I can see everywhere you go." "The tracking app doesn't work anymore," Monica lied. She'd turned off her phone's location services, but she knew it wouldn't matter. He'd find her. Men like him always did. They couldn't accept that someone had chosen to leave. They had to know where their property was at all times. "Monica, listen to me very carefully." Derek's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You think you're leaving me. You think you're going to take our life and ruin it. You think you're going to embarrass me in court, tell people I hurt you, make me look bad. But that's not how this ends. Derek, come home, right now, come home, and we'll talk about this. We'll figure it out together. We're a team, you and me. That's what marriage is." "I'm not coming home," Monica said. And in that moment, something in her solidified. She wasn't going back. She wasn't going to negotiate. She wasn't going to convince him to be reasonable. She was done. "Then you've made your choice," Derek said, and he hung up. The phone went dead, and Monica felt the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Tasha was staring at her. "What did he say?" "He said, 'I made my choice.'" "Did he threaten you?" "He doesn't have to. I can hear it in his voice. I can feel it." Monica sat down on the edge of the bed. "When a man sounds that calm, that's when you know he's decided something. When he stops trying to convince you and just accepts that you're leaving, that's when it gets dangerous." Tasha called the police back. An officer came to the apartment at midnight and took down everything Monica could remember about the calls, the threats, the tracking. He assured them that violating the harassment order would result in immediate arrest. He said they were doing the right thing. He said Monica was smart to reach out. He left at 12:47 a.m., and Monica finally lay down on Tasha's couch. But she didn't sleep. She texted her mother, "I'm leaving him. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. I'll explain everything when we talk." She opened her banking app and checked her balance. $43,000. Savings that Derek didn't know about. Money she'd been setting aside for years in a separate account. Enough to get an apartment, to hire a lawyer, to start over. She looked at Jalen's photograph one more time before turning off the lamp. "I'm getting out, baby," she whispered. I'm choosing life. At 1:30 a.m., Derek pulled into his driveway. The house was dark and quiet. He sat in the truck for 5 minutes, just staring at the place he and Monica called home. He thought about the life insurance policy. He thought about how insurance companies pay out faster when there's a death in the home. An accident, they'd call it. Faulty wiring. A fire that started in the middle of the night when no one could have seen it coming. He grabbed the first red container from the truck bed. What happens when someone decides that losing you is not an option, no matter what? The match was struck at 2:11 a.m. Derek stood in his living room with the lighter in one hand and a rag soaked in gasoline in the other. He thought about Monica leaving him. He thought about Monica in court, telling a judge that he'd hurt her. He thought about Monica walking away with half of everything he'd worked for. What little that was. He thought about his reputation, his dignity, his power. All of it walking out the door because his wife had decided she didn't want to be controlled anymore. The rag caught fire. He dropped it onto the carpet, and the flames spread with terrifying speed. Blue and orange and red, climbing up the walls like something alive. He poured gasoline across the living room floor, down the hallway, pooling it at the base of the stairs. Each time he tipped the container, the smell filled his lungs, sharp and chemical and final. This was the point of no return. Once he lit the second fire, there was nothing he could do to stop what came next. He'd planned to leave. That was the original idea. Pour the gasoline, set the fires, get out. Let it burn. Let the insurance company pay out. Then collect the money and disappear. Start a new life in another state. Find another woman, another Monica. Someone else he could shape and control and own. But the smoke came faster than he expected. The flames moved with a hunger that surprised him. The fire on the first floor was already spreading upstairs, through the heating vents, through the open stairwell, consuming everything in its path. The hallway filled with smoke so thick he could barely see his own hands. He could hear the fire now, not just see it. He could hear it roaring, eating through the house like a beast. Derek ran for the front door. It was only 10 feet away, but the smoke was so dense that everything was black. His lungs burned. His eyes watered. He stumbled forward, reaching for where he thought the door was, but the furniture was in his way, moved from his memory of the layout, but shifted by the chaos of the fire. His shin cracked against the coffee table. Pain shot through his leg, but he kept moving. He had to get out. He had to survive this. The front door was blocked by a wall of flames. The fire had already reached the living room window and blown it out, and now the inferno was coming back inside, drawn by the new opening, consuming the curtains and the walls and the very air itself. Derek turned and ran for the kitchen, but the back door was locked. He'd locked everything, paranoid about Monica somehow getting back inside. His hands shook as he fumbled with the deadbolt. The heat behind him was intense now. It felt like the sun had crashed through the roof and landed in his house. He got the door open. Smoke poured out into the cool night air. He stumbled into the backyard, coughing, gasping, his lungs screaming for clean air. Behind him, the entire first floor of the house was engulfed. The windows on the second floor were glowing orange from the inside. Fire was climbing toward the roof. He'd made it. He was alive. His plan had worked. But then he remembered something. Something that made his blood go cold. Monica had told him, months ago, that she'd left her extra car keys in the bedroom nightstand. The bedroom was upstairs. Upstairs, where the fire was spreading, And those keys were in a manila envelope. That manila envelope contained documents. Documents that Derek had forged. Documents showing that he'd changed the life insurance beneficiary. Documents that, if found by investigators, would make it very clear that this fire wasn't an accident. Derek turned and looked at the house. The flames were visible now from the backyard, shooting through the second-floor windows, climbing the exterior walls. The heat was so intense that his skin felt like it was burning just from standing nearby. But those documents had his fingerprints on them. They had his handwriting. They had the insurance company letterhead that he'd doctored. The police would find them. The investigators would find them. And he would hang for murder. He ran back toward the door. The smoke came at him like a wall. The heat was unbearable. He made it 3 steps inside before his lungs seized. He couldn't breathe. The smoke was poison, thick and black and choking. He covered his mouth with his hand and pushed forward, stumbling through the kitchen, trying to reach the stairs. But the staircase was already burning. The entire hallway leading to it was a tunnel of flame. The ceiling above started to collapse, drywall and insulation falling like snow, carrying fire with it. Derek backed away, coughing violently, his eyes streaming with tears from the smoke. He turned to run back out, but the kitchen was becoming harder to navigate. The heat had warped the floor. His shoes stuck slightly to the melting linoleum. He made it back to the door, out into the yard, and he collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air. But he could still see those documents in his mind, the manila envelope, the forged signature, the evidence that would destroy him. At 2:23 a.m., his truck was parked in the driveway. He could leave. He could run right now, get in that truck and drive to the airport. He could leave the country. He could disappear before anyone connected him to this fire. But the documents, those documents would still be inside. He didn't know that Monica had removed every single one of them 3 weeks ago and given them to her lawyer. He didn't know that his forgery was already documented with a legal professional, that there was already a paper trail leading directly to him. He thought the only evidence was upstairs, and he thought that if he could just get to those documents, burn them completely, there would be nothing connecting him to the murder. So Derek went back inside. He made it to the second-floor landing before the smoke overwhelmed him. His lungs were already damaged from the first attempt. His vision was blurry. The flames were now so intense that he could feel his skin beginning to blister. The ceiling above him cracked and groaned, and a support beam began to sag. He staggered toward the master bedroom. The door was only 10 feet away. He didn't make it. The ceiling came down at 2:31 a.m., collapsing directly onto the staircase where Derek was standing. He was crushed beneath the weight of the house, wood beams and plaster and metal supports pinning him to the second-floor landing. The fire consumed him. His body became fuel for the flames. Outside, the neighbors called 911. The fire trucks were there in 7 minutes, but by then it was too late. The house was fully engulfed. The roof had partially collapsed. There was nothing to save. The firefighters found 2 bodies. The first was near the front door on the first floor, burned beyond recognition but showing signs of trying to escape. The second was upstairs, pinned beneath the collapsed ceiling. Both were dead. Both would take dental records to identify. But here's what the investigators would eventually discover. The woman downstairs, the one near the front door, had been trying to get out. She'd been running toward safety. The man upstairs had been running toward something else. Toward documents, toward evidence, toward a desperate attempt to cover up what he'd done. And those documents, they were ash now. Everything was ash. But it didn't matter. because Monica Harris had already made copies. She'd given them to 3 separate people. She'd filed them with her lawyer. She'd protected herself in every way possible before she ever left him. The fire that Derek Harris had set to make himself rich and powerful would end up revealing everything. When will the truth finally come out? The investigation began before the bodies were even removed from the wreckage. Fire Marshal James Chen arrived on scene at 3:47 a.m., and something about the burn pattern didn't sit right with him. In his 26 years of investigating fires, he'd seen accidental burns and he'd seen intentional ones. This was intentional. The heat damage was concentrated in specific areas: the living room, the hallway, the base of the stairs. That wasn't how an electrical fire worked. That wasn't how a kitchen fire spread. That was a pattern created by accelerant. By 6:15 a.m., the preliminary report confirmed it. Gasoline residue was found throughout the first floor. The fire had been set deliberately. This wasn't an accident. This was a crime scene. The FBI was called in at 7:30 a.m. Special Agent Maria Lopez arrived with a team that included an evidence technician and a forensic specialist. They photographed every inch of the house before anything was moved. They catalogued every fragment. They collected samples from the burned flooring, from the charred walls, from the accelerant-soaked carpet. Everything was bagged and tagged and marked as evidence. When the bodies were finally removed, they were taken to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. The woman was identified through dental records as Monica Harris, age 35. The man was identified as Derek Harris, age 38. Both had lived at the address. Both had died in the fire. But the medical examiner, Dr. Akhil Patel, had a question that haunted him from the moment he made the first incision. Why was the woman's body found near the front door, showing evidence of attempted escape? And why was the man's body found upstairs, away from any exit? The woman had been trying to get out. The man had been trying to get in, or at least trying to reach something inside the burning house. That was unusual. Most people, when faced with a fire, move toward safety. They don't move deeper into danger. Meanwhile, Monica's lawyer, attorney David Washington, was receiving a phone call from Monica's mother. Monica hadn't come home. Monica wasn't at Tasha's apartment anymore. The police had come by asking questions. There was something about a fire. There was something about Monica being dead. Attorney Washington immediately understood what had happened. He pulled the documents from his file: the forged insurance policy, the changed beneficiary, the handwriting analysis that showed Derek's signature was fake. He called Special Agent Lopez and said he had information relevant to the investigation. By 9:00 a.m., the full picture was becoming clear. Derek Harris had taken out a life insurance policy on his wife. He'd forged documents to make himself the sole beneficiary. He'd changed the policy 3 months before the fire. He'd then set that fire while his wife was at a friend's house, planning to make it look like an accident and collect $500,000. Except Monica had gotten out. Monica had gotten away. Monica had gone to her lawyer and left evidence. And then, somehow, she'd gone back. Either she'd run toward home, toward her house, toward the life she was trying to escape. Or Derek had found her. Either way, she was in that house when the fire started. The questions multiplied. Did she know he was there? Did she try to stop him? Did she run inside to save something, photos, documents, anything that mattered? Or did Derek drag her back to the house against her will? The answer came from an unexpected source: Tasha. Monica's friend gave a statement to investigators at 11:30 a.m. She said Monica had been at her apartment all night. She said Monica was planning to go to her lawyer's office at 9 a.m. She said Monica's car was parked outside her apartment. She said she had text messages from Monica sent at 2:00 a.m. saying she was trying to sleep. But when investigators went to Tasha's apartment building, they found something in the parking lot. Monica's car was still there, but on the back seat was a note written in Derek's handwriting. It said, "I know where you are. I always know where you are. Come with me now, or I burn it all down." The timeline became clear. Derek had followed Monica from the hospital. He'd found her at Tasha's. He'd written that note and left it on her car. And then, instead of waiting for Monica to come to him, he'd gone home and set the fire anyway. Maybe he'd changed his mind about saving himself. Maybe he'd decided that if he couldn't have Monica, nobody could. Maybe he'd decided to burn it all. The house, the evidence, the future, everything, rather than face the consequences of what he'd done. But Monica had gotten that note. Monica had understood the threat, and Monica had made a choice in that moment, a choice that probably cost her her life. She'd either gone to confront him, or she'd gone to stop him, or she'd gone to try to save something that mattered. And she'd walked into a house that was already burning. By 2:00 p.m., the investigation had enough evidence to file charges, posthumously, against Derek Harris: murder, attempted insurance fraud, arson. The charges didn't matter now, because he was dead. But they mattered for the record. They mattered for the truth. At the medical examiner's office, Dr. Patel reviewed the autopsy results one more time. Monica's lungs showed evidence of smoke inhalation. She'd been alive when the fire started. She'd been conscious. She'd been breathing the smoke as it filled her lungs, gasping for air that was poison. She'd died slowly, asphyxiated by the smoke while trying to reach the front door. Derek had died from the ceiling collapse. He'd survived the smoke and flames long enough to be trapped upstairs. He'd survived long enough to understand what was happening. He'd survived long enough to regret every choice that led to that moment. On the evening of the investigation's conclusion, Attorney Washington released a statement on behalf of Monica's family. Monica Harris spent her life honoring those she loved. She honored her son, Jalen, with a beautiful funeral. She honored her commitments in her work as a nurse. And in her final moments, she made a choice. We may never know exactly what she was trying to do when she entered that house, but we know this: she was trying to do the right thing. She was trying to stand up to someone who wanted to control her, even when that control had turned deadly. Her memory will inspire us to speak up, to reach out, and to never accept that love should mean living in fear. How can we honor Monica's memory and protect others from suffering the same fate? The memorial service was held on a Thursday, exactly 1 week after the fire. It was raining, a soft, persistent rain that felt like the sky was crying. The church was full, every pew occupied, people standing along the back walls. The casket was closed because there wasn't enough left of Monica to display. But there were flowers, white lilies, just like at Jalen's funeral. It seemed fitting that Monica would be sent off the same way she'd honored her son. Tasha stood at the microphone, and her hands were shaking. She was Monica's closest friend, and she'd been the last person Monica spoke to before she made that final choice. She gripped the sides of the podium and looked out at the crowd, at the nurses from the hospital wearing their scrubs, at Monica's mother sitting in the front row with her head bowed, at the detective who'd taken Tasha's statement, at the neighbors who'd watched the house burn. Monica wasn't perfect, Tasha began, her voice breaking. She made mistakes. She chose the wrong man. She stayed when she should have left. But she wasn't weak. What she was hopeful. She believed that people could change. She believed that love could fix anything. She believed that if she just tried hard enough, if she just loved deep enough, everything would work out. Tasha paused, wiping her eyes. I think a lot of us here can relate to that. We've all believed things about people that turned out to be wrong. We've all loved someone who didn't deserve it. We've all hoped for the best, even when the evidence said we should be afraid. That's not a flaw. That's what it means to be human. That's what it means to love. She looked directly at the closed casket. Monica spent her entire adult life taking care of people. She took care of Jalen. She took care of her patients at the hospital. She took care of her mother. And at the end, even when she should have been running as far away as possible, she was trying to do the right thing. She was trying to be the person she always was, someone who showed up, who stood firm, who didn't just accept injustice. Monica's mother made a sound then, a small, broken noise that came from somewhere deep inside her chest. The woman next to her, Monica's sister Lakeisha, put her arm around her and held her while she cried. I want everyone here to know, Tasha said, her voice getting stronger, that Monica's death was not a tragedy that had to happen. This was a choice. This was a man who decided that his pride, his control, his need to own another person was more important than her life. This was a man who couldn't accept that someone would choose themselves over him, and so he decided to destroy her rather than let her go. She looked out at the detective again. We talk a lot about domestic violence statistics. We say things like 1 in 4 women and every 9 seconds. But these aren't statistics. They're women. They're mothers. They're nurses and teachers and artists and dreamers. They're people like Monica, who deserved to live, who deserved to get out, who deserved a chance to rebuild. The church was silent, except for the rain against the windows and the sound of people crying quietly. Monica forgave too easily, Tasha continued. She believed people could change. She saw the best in everyone. But I need to say this to anyone watching who's in a situation like Monica was. Loving someone is not the same as sacrificing yourself. Believing in people is not the same as accepting abuse. And hoping things will get better is not a strategy for survival. She stepped back from the microphone and sat down. No one else spoke. The choir sang, "We'll understand it better by and by," and the church filled with voices, some strong, some barely a whisper. People wept. People held each other. People whispered prayers and said goodbye to a woman who'd never gotten the chance to say hello to the life she was building outside of fear. After the service, there was a reception in the church basement. People brought food, collard greens and mac and cheese and biscuits and peach cobbler. They stood in small groups and shared memories. One nurse said Monica had stayed late one night to sit with a dying patient because the patient had nobody else. Another said Monica had given her $50 when her car broke down and she couldn't afford the repair. The patient advocate from the hospital said Monica had gone to bat for patients who couldn't afford their medications, fighting with insurance companies on their behalf. A social worker approached Monica's mother and said, "I want you to know that Monica saved lives. Not just with her nursing, but by the example she set, the way she refused to become bitter, the way she kept showing up. That matters." Monica's mother nodded but didn't speak. Her eyes were fixed on her daughter's photograph, the one from the funeral program, showing Monica in her white summer dress from the image they'd used for the memorial, standing in front of her suburban house with her slight smile, unaware that the place that would become her tomb. 2 weeks later, Detective Malcolm Richards from the police department received the final forensic report. It confirmed what investigators already suspected. Derek Harris had set the fire. The accelerant pattern matched gasoline. His fingerprints were found on a gas station receipt from earlier that evening. Surveillance footage from the parking lot showed him loading red plastic containers into his truck. The timeline matched. The evidence was overwhelming. But the detective was still haunted by one question. How did Monica end up at that house? The note on her car was clear. It was a threat. But did she go to that house voluntarily? Or did Derek force her to go? Had he shown up at Tasha's apartment and threatened her? Had he taken her at gunpoint? The only person who knew was Monica, and she was gone. Tasha believed Monica had made a choice. She believed that Monica, having escaped once, couldn't bear the thought of Derek targeting Tasha next. Tasha believed Monica went to confront him, to tell him to stop, to try to reason with a man who was beyond reason. And in that confrontation, the fire was set, and Monica tried to escape, and she couldn't make it out in time. But they would never know for certain. What they knew was this: Monica Harris had lived in fear and died in fire, and the man who caused that was also dead, buried beneath the same ash and regret. At the gravesite, Monica was laid to rest next to her son. Jalen's grave was only 50 yards away. For the first time in months, mother and son were close together. The rain fell on the casket as it was lowered into the ground. The sky was grey. The flowers were white. And the people who loved Monica stood at the edge of a hole in the earth and said goodbye to someone who'd been so alive, so full of love, just weeks before. What would Monica want us to remember about her life? If you're watching this story, and you're nodding along because you see yourself in Monica's choices, I need to tell you something directly. What happened to her doesn't have to be your ending. The path she took isn't the only path available. Monica spent months in a house with a man who checked her phone and monitored her spending and questioned where she was every hour of the day. She spent months accepting it because she'd convinced herself that it was normal, that it was what love looked like, that if she just tried harder, things would improve. She spent months telling herself that the bruises were accidents, that the anger was justified, that she somehow deserved what was happening to her. This is what abuse does. It doesn't announce itself with a billboard. It doesn't come at you with both fists from day one. It whispers. It says things like, "I'm just worried about you, and I just want to know where you are," and "I only got angry because you provoked me." It normalizes itself so slowly that you don't realize you're trapped until the walls are closing in. Monica's story is a true one. Not this woman specifically. The names and some details have been changed to protect the privacy of people involved, but stories like this happen every single day. A man meets a vulnerable woman, a grieving woman, a woman with an empty space where love used to be. He tells her he can fill that space. He promises protection. He promises understanding. And then, once she's committed, once she's married him, moved into his house, built a life with him, he starts to tighten the noose. The question isn't why Monica stayed. The question is why men like Derek do this. And the answer is that they're broken. They're insecure. They're people who know they can't compete in a world where women have choices, so they try to eliminate the choice. They try to create a world where their partner has nowhere to go, no one to talk to, no way out except through them. If you're in that situation right now, I want you to hear this. It is not your fault. You are not responsible for his behavior, and leaving isn't a betrayal, it's survival. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Tell them what's happening. They have resources. They have shelter. They have people who've been where you are, and they know how to help. Text START to 88788. There are chat options if you can't talk on the phone. There are websites you can visit on a computer, at a library, if you can't search from home. There are people whose job it is to help you get safe. For those of you who watched Monica's story and felt anger rising in your chest, anger at Derek, anger at the system that didn't protect her fast enough, anger at a world where this is still happening, channel that anger into action. Call your elected representatives and tell them you want funding for domestic violence shelters. Support organizations that help survivors rebuild their lives. If you know someone in a dangerous situation, tell them you see what's happening. Tell them you believe them. Tell them you'll help. And listen, if someone tells you they're afraid of their partner, don't suggest counseling. Don't ask them to try harder. Don't minimize it by saying, "I'm sure he didn't mean it," or "he probably just had a bad day." Just listen. Just believe. Just ask what they need to feel safe. Monica's mother now spends her time speaking at domestic violence awareness events. She tells people about her daughter, how brilliant Jalen was, how loving Monica was, how neither of them deserved what happened to them. She talks about the warning signs she didn't see until it was too late. She talks about the moment she found out her daughter was dead, burned to death by someone she'd married in good faith. Attorney Washington used Monica's case in his arguments for stronger domestic violence laws. He pushed for legislation that would make it easier to obtain protective orders, easier to prosecute violations, easier to hold abusers accountable before they escalate to murder. Tasha still works as a nurse at the same hospital, and every time a patient comes in with bruises they can't quite explain, or with a partner who won't leave their side, or with that hollow look in their eyes, Tasha thinks of Monica. She sits down with them. She gives them the hotline number. She tells them Monica's story. And she tells them, "You deserve better. You deserve safe. You deserve a chance at the life you want." The house on Maple Drive was condemned. It was demolished exactly 3 months after the fire. The lot has been empty ever since. Sometimes neighbors walk by and remember the day it burned. They remember the sirens and the heat and the smoke that seemed to go on forever. They remember how suddenly a life could disappear. Monica Harris was 35 years old when she died. She'd nursed thousands of patients over her career. She'd raised a beautiful son who died too young. She'd loved her mother and her friends and a man she thought would love her back. She'd made mistakes. She'd believed in second chances. She'd seen the good in people. She also refused to accept abuse. In her final moments, Monica made a choice that probably cost her her life. But that choice was hers. That choice was an act of resistance. That choice said, "I will not quietly accept this. I will not disappear. I will not let fear silence me." If you're watching this and you're thinking about Monica tonight, do something with that thought. Share her story. Tell your friends. Post about it. Don't let her death become just another statistic. And if you're in a situation where someone is controlling you, monitoring you, hurting you, please understand that this doesn't have to be your ending. Monica's choice came at a terrible cost. But it was her choice. She could have stayed. She didn't. She could have been silent. She wasn't. She could have disappeared. Instead, she fought back. You have that choice too. You have resources. You have people who will help. And you have a future that doesn't include living in fear. Remember Monica Harris. Remember her son, Jalen. Remember that love should never make you feel smaller. Love should never make you afraid. And please, if you're watching from a place of safety, subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story that needs to be told. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us if Monica's story sparked something in you. Tell us about the women and men you know who've fought their way out of situations like this. Be part of the conversation. Because stories like Monica's matter so. They matter because they're warnings, but they're also blueprints. They show us what can happen, yes, but they also show us what it looks like to choose yourself, what it looks like to reach out, what it looks like to survive. Subscribe, share, speak up. Because the next time someone in our community tells us they're afraid, we need to be ready to listen, to believe, and to help. Monica's story doesn't have to be the ending for anyone else, but it can be a beginning. It can be the moment you decide to reach out. It can be the moment you tell someone. It can be the moment you choose life. That's Monica Harris. That's her legacy. That's what we remember.